the newsagents.
It's been the honor of my lifetime to serve as your president. I love the job, but I love my country more. I love my country more. And all this talk about how I'm angry at all those people who said I should step down. That's not true.
Inside the United Centre, a forest has grown up of "We Love Joe" banners. Everyone is holding one. They are still distributing them. And the crowd is chanting, "We love Joe, we love Joe."
Joe Biden is saying goodbye to a 50-year career at the top of the Democratic Party. This was supposed to be his night. Instead, he's the ghost at the feast. What has he said? How has he handed the baton over? We're in the hall and we'll bring you every step of the way. Welcome to the newsagents.
It's Lewis. It is John, and Joe Biden is just coming to the end of his speech. It has been raucous, emotional. Joe Biden has talked about the future, passing the baton on to Kamala Harris to take the fight to Donald Trump.
And they have just finished handing out another banner, which is not "We love you, Joe," or "We want you, Joe," but "Thank you, Joe."
Here we are.
Yeah, you've got one for posterity, Joe.
I've got one for posterity. That's what they're sending out.
But of course, the question is, it sort of does beg the dark question. What are they thanking him for? Because of course they're thanking him for the service. It's 50 years of service to the party. They think he's been a successful president. But you could also say they're thanking him for not sticking in the race, not staying in the race, and for giving this speech rather than the keynote speech on Thursday, which of course Kamala Harris will be delivering instead. Because let's be really frank, let's be really honest, they would never have been. We've been in this hall throughout the course of the night. They are so pumped for Kamala. The energy is something else, and they never were for him, and they never would have been for him.
The interesting thing about tonight is it has been chaotic. It has run late. There has been elements where you thought they haven't got the agenda under control. But for all of that, the energy in this room is unmistakable. The energy is profound. And they kind of think, you know what? We're in the right place, even if it has been a little bit chaotic.
I've made a lot of mistakes in my career, but I gave my best to you. For 50 years, like many of you, I've given my heart and soul to our nation. And I've been blessed a million times in return with the support of the American people. I've either been too young to be in the Senate because I wasn't 30 yet, and too old to stay as president. But I hope you know how grateful I am to all of you. I can honestly say, and I mean this from the bottom, give you my word as a Biden, I can honestly say I'm more optimistic about the future than I was when I was elected as a 29-year-old United States Senator. I mean it. Folks, we just have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America. And there's nothing we cannot do when we do it together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
It's the morning after the night before, and I guess we're trying to take stock of how much of an explanation we've had from Joe Biden. And certainly, in one way, it's more than he said before. I was too young when I became a senator. I'm now too old to be president. He said, I love the job, but I love my country more. All of that is fine up to a point. In June of this year, he didn't think he was too old, and he thought he should still be the president. In July, he changed his mind, and what we don't have is the obvious bit of, oh, so what changed your mind, Mr. President?
Yeah, I suppose in one sense, it was the first clear acknowledgement he's ever made that he was too old for the job. He's never said that before for obvious reasons. How could he possibly do so? So it was, I think, a significant line. albeit a pretty fleeting reference and explanation as to why he's gone. And that is, we've been saying all week, and you wouldn't really get it from the American networks, which have been pretty fawning in terms of the coverage of this event. But it is deeply peculiar, right? Because there are just, as we've been saying, all of these unsaid, unspoken truths. Like when they're handing out those little placards saying, "Thank you, Joe," the unsaid thing is, what are you thanking him for? Yes, clearly it's for 50 years of service. Yes, he does occupy a genuine place in the heart of the Democratic Party for the length of that service and for besting Donald Trump in 2020, for which they will always be grateful. But let's be honest, they were thanking him for not standing again, which is at best a deeply bittersweet thing to confront as a president, the first president who had wanted his party's nomination for a second term but did not receive it since Chester Arthur over a century ago. That is a difficult pill to swallow, but not one that in any sense that anyone is confronting. Instead, it's his just saccharine and mawkish and sentiment.
Yes, and it was dolloped on in thick spoonful loads in the convention centre last night. I think the interesting thing is that, yes, there was huge sentiment, there was emotion, there was an outpouring of love for Joe Biden. And fair enough, he's been a decent, good, upstanding public servant for a very long time, even if he had gone on too long. But was anyone in that hall thinking, "Oh, Joe, you've made the wrong decision"? And my mind went back to the 2006 Labour Party conference where Tony Blair makes this barnstorming speech at the end of his premiership. It's been, he's been forced out of office by Gordon Brown. The day before, Cherie Blair has made some rude comment about Gordon Brown. Tony Blair, would he address that in the conference speech? And he said, "At least I know my wife isn't going to run off with the bloke next door." And it was a great gag, brilliantly delivered. And I got the sense after Blair finished speaking that there were a whole load of people from the Brownite wing of the Labour Party who suddenly thought, "God, what have we done?" No one thought, "What have we done?" last night. Everyone felt a huge sense of relief.
Well, indeed. And everyone talking about that line saying, "I was too young to be a senator, too old to be president." I mean, in one sense, everyone, again, the American networks all talking about it as that acknowledgement. There is a slightly different way to read it as well, right? Which is that Biden has a deeply complicated relationship with the Democratic Party, right? Because he feels and has long felt, and it speaks to that nature of him and his relationship with time, like the job which he has yearned, the presidency, always being slightly out of reach, either because he was too young, because he was talked up in 1972 as a young senator who came into the Senate when he wasn't even 30, and everyone was talking about him as being president, but it never quite happened for various reasons. And then by the time he reaches the summit, he's talked out of standing in 2016 by Obama, by party elites. And now again, he's been talked out of standing this time. And again, they're kind of like the hypocrisy or the lie of it, right? I mean, like, Biden was asked about it, and when he came off stage by reporters, and he was asked about his relationship with Nancy Pelosi, and who obviously was instrumental in basically getting him to stand aside. And he says, "No one influenced my decision but myself." And of course, he's an old man, he's a proud man, and one has to respect that completely. And I can completely understand why he would say it. But, we need to get real here about what has really happened. And there is also another way to look at it, which is that for all of the chaos that there has been, there could have been a very different convention, in a sense that had Biden not come, had he not made that speech, had he not hugged Kamala on stage, giving a very physical manifestation of the passing of the torch, phrase we keep using, cliche, but it's true, then of course all of the talk would still have been about the internecine battles at the top of the Democratic Party. So for all of the resentment, for all of the bitterness there undoubtedly is, Biden is a good party man, and he did what he had to do.
Yeah, he did what he had to do, and there'll be an enormous sense of relief that, kind of like in a relay race, the baton has been passed and they haven't fumbled the handover. And that was all very good. The bittersweetness must be accentuated by this, that the sense of joy at the Democratic Party, which we've talked about in the past couple of days, that Kamala Harris is now on the ticket, and the energy that was in that convention centre last night.
I would say.
Yeah, euphoria. The more euphoric they feel, the more it must hurt. Stab at Joe Biden. That, my God, they're all celebrating the fact that I'm not the one anymore. And again, going back to the speech that Joe Biden made, and we just played a clip of it there, actually, for the most part, it was a speech that I sense had been written before he'd pulled out of the race. It was going to all the themes that he's always talked about. It was very much Joe Biden playing the greatest hits album of the things he's done, of why he's standing against Donald Trump, of why he's unhappy with Donald Trump, of why he needed to be in the fight. And it was like an extra paragraph had been bolted on at the end. But it's not me, it's Kamala now, and we've all got to unite behind her.
In some cases, literally just a single line. I mean, instead of saying, I will stop this, or I will not do that, or I will do this, he just said, this is what I've done, and this is what Kamala and Tim will do, or will not do. You know, it felt so much as if, I mean, there was all this talk in the run-up to it, of it being his last great speech that he would ever make to the Democratic Party. And, you know, bear in mind, this is a guy who has spoken at, again, because of his longevity, he's spoken at every single Democratic National Convention since 1972, bar one, and that's because he'd had an injury and he wasn't able to attend. He was Jimmy Carter's floor manager in 1976, right? So again, this is a man with a deep, umbilical relationship with the Democratic Party, and it is probably, possibly, plausibly, the last time he will ever speak from that convention podium. And so there was this sense of anticipation. And, you know, he has, and this is one of the sad things about Biden in a way, you know, there are glimmers, because of his age, there are glimmers of the man that was. And he always was a real, like, you know, barnstorming, tub thumper, speech maker. He had a great rhetorical style and flourishes, and he still, you know, it was a decent speech. There were real flashes of it, and sometimes he genuinely got the crowd going. But at the same time, a lot of it was boilerplate. Like we'd heard much of it before, you and I, you know, all of the phrases, all of the stories. And to some extent, I think that is because, you know, frankly, Biden is probably at the point now where he doesn't necessarily have the dexterity to pivot towards a wholly different sort of speech, a wholly different sort of set of talking points. I mean, like, you know, you could have imagined a very different speech he could have given. He could have spoken about Kamala Harris alone. He could have just said, I don't want to talk about the past, I want to talk about the future. Let me tell you about my vice president. And of course he was glowing towards her, and he had that nice line saying, you know, she was the first decision to pick her as VP that he made as the nominee, and it was the best decision he made in his career, and that is nice. And all that the American viewers at home or this morning will have seen is that picture, as I say, of the two of them hugging and the baton being passed. But it was classic Biden, with all of the merits and demerits that contains.
Well, if you are the sort of party manager and you are scheduling the evening's events, what you want to achieve is a build-up of excitement, of fervour, of an atmosphere in the room, all of which the Democratic Party managers did, except for the fact that after Joe had come on and there'd been the 5-minute standing ovation, the atmosphere kind of sagged. You could feel that Joe Biden couldn't hold the room in the way that some of the previous speakers had. And we had an absolute barnstorming speech from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. We had an amazing speech from Raphael Warnock, kind of who was like a preacher in the pulpit. You had Hillary Clinton saying, we finally got to break the glass ceiling. And, you know, and I think a lot of people felt very emotional seeing her after her failed attempt in 2016 to win the presidency. All those speeches were great. And then it was the Biden speech.
It was exceptionally late because of all of the other speeches going on for so long. I mean, at one point, Biden was still speaking at midnight New York time, and crucially, not so much New York, but Pennsylvania time and Michigan time, and all of these sort of swing states time. There was all this talk about whether that was deliberate on the part of the DNC. I doubt it was, but I suspect that Biden, who is not insensitive to any feeling of slight, would probably have felt that, and the Biden family would probably have felt that as well. And I mean, just on AOC, by the way, I mean, boy, does it feel like she's got a big future in this party. I mean, AOC, it was amazing to see last night, absolutely electrified that room, probably more than anybody else.
Because we know that Donald Trump would sell this country for $1 if it meant lining his own pockets and greasing the palms of his Wall Street friends. And I, for one, am tired of hearing about how a 2-bit union buster thinks of himself as more of a patriot than the woman who fights every single day to lift working people out from under the boots of greed, trampling on our way of life. The truth is, Don, you cannot love this country if you only fight for the wealthy and big business.
You know, you got to think about her journey. She was, just a few years ago, a complete outsider on the periphery of the Democratic Party, endless battles with Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, and others as a kind of member of the squad, the kind of awkward squad, literally, of sort of really left-wing representatives in the House of Representatives. Instead now, in so many ways, she's proven to be a very savvy political player. The party has moved towards her in so many ways. That's another theme of this convention, how strong, both in ideology and also personnel, the left or the progressive left are. She's not peripheral anymore. She's going to be centre to the Democratic Party's future.
Just one thing on the timing before we wrap this discussion. James Taylor, the great singer-songwriter, had been due to perform You've Got a Friend, and he got dropped from the running order because it was running so late. And so it deprived Joe Biden of being able to listen to the lyric when you're down and troubled and you need a helping hand.
You've got a friend, but hopefully James Taylor's got a fee. So that is something.
I bet he was doing it for nothing. Charity.
You wouldn't know about that, John, would you?
No, never knowingly undersold.
And Joe Biden, of course, we should say, I mean, again, you know what he's doing this week? He's not going to be at the convention for the rest of the week. He's off on holiday. He's going to Santa Barbara in California with Jill. Who can blame him? But again, the road not travelled is already extraordinary to see.
Extraordinary indeed. Look, we're going to be back in just a moment because outside the convention centre, there were big pro-Gaza protests taking place, involving some clashes with the police. And we spoke to a number of people involved in that yesterday. And we should add, there is strong language from the very start of that report.
Fuck you, Kamala! Fuck you! Aaron Bushnell! Aaron fucking Bushnell!
Genocide Joe is his name!
Killing children is his game!
Killing children is his name!
Killer Kamala is her name!
Killer Kamala is her name!
Killing children is her game!
So this is the pro-Palestine march just about a mile from the convention centre where Democrats are meeting, and you can see there's a big line of police, and you've got, for the most part, noisy but peaceful protests so far.
I mean, you can probably hear one of the chants they're saying is, "Killer Kamala, what do you say? How many kids have you killed today?" Which of course echoes the famous LBJ line that was used in this very city in 1968 at another Democratic National Convention about the situation in the Vietnam War and President Johnson's policy at that time towards that conflict.
And it is a complete echo. Now, of course, 1968 was very different because of the violent way in which the police broke up the protests. Today, the police have been at pains to say, if this protest remains peaceful, noisy, loud, raucous, fine. If it goes to law breaking, not so fine. The key is for this demonstration to pass, for it to protest, to proceed, but not to be able to breach the line of security, the ring of steel around the United Centre, where, of course, the Democrat leadership is meeting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the differences, of course, with 68 is that at that time, the mayor, very famous mayor, Mayor Daley, was a heavy-handed kind of guy. He had something that he wanted to try and prove. He wanted to rough up some of those protesters to show that it wasn't their party, wasn't their city. The current mayor of Chicago, very left-wing figure, progressive figure, doesn't want that to happen, has been happy to authorize these protests. But people, there are similarities with the sort of protests that we've seen in London since the beginning of the conflict, the Israel-Gaza conflict, Hamas conflict. And, similar sorts of kind of people, similar sorts of, younger, kind of clearly left-wing, but the sorts of invective that is being deployed, I mean, just looking around the signs at the moment, you've got pictures of Joe Biden calling him Genocide Joe. You've got pictures of placards showing Kamala Harris with blood on her hands, blood on her eyes. This is deeply personal stuff, and of course, people here feel very, very legitimately about it, sort of strongly about it. But it is a reminder that for all of the talk, we've been talking about the vibes, right, haven't we, at the convention of kind of transition, all those cliches, the baton being passed over to Harris, that some of the structural problems that Biden had, which is, let's be honest, a lot of the people here would be Democrat voters, right? They would vote for the Democratic Party, even if they didn't much like it all of the time, they would vote for them. There is still a substantial portion of people who perhaps feel a bit less passionately about Harris's role in all of this versus Biden, but nonetheless who might not turn out to vote come November. And when we know how tight those margins are in key states, many of these people have been bussed in from Wisconsin, from Pennsylvania, from Ohio, all states that are marginal. And, we know how tight those margins are, and if they don't turn out and vote, they could get Trump rather than Harris.
If you want a more progressive party, and you want a party that will take a more even-handed view towards Israel, say, then, Donald Trump is not your man. And of course, the danger, the irony of these protests is that if you're saying don't vote Democrat because Kamala's a killer and Joe Biden's Genocide Joe, if you've got that as your slogan and you just don't vote, then you increase the likelihood of Donald Trump, which will be even more unquestioningly pro-Israel in the policies that it pursues.
It is a reminder actually being here that there is one final act, that there is one final thing that Biden could do for his party and do for who he hopes to be his successor and his Vice President Harris, which is right now, a very important story, is taking place in American politics. It's not happening in Chicago. It's happening in Tel Aviv, it's happening in Jerusalem. It is happening on endless frantic phone calls, in particular between Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas. If Biden could do anything to yet ameliorate his successor's chances as a Democratic nominee for the presidency, it is to secure a peace agreement in Gaza. Because if he could do that, a ceasefire, even if it's only sort of 3 months or 6 months, it might just take at least some of the heat out of the invective here and some of the energy that some of these people have in terms of what they're thinking about they would vote in November, and actually allow that space to be full of other things. If for whatever reason, in the next few months, Gaza and Israel goes back up the political agenda even more, and God knows there could be a full-blown escalation, a full-blown war, that can only be bad for Harris. So the best thing that Biden could do, and of course he's trying desperately, and he might not be able to do it, the best thing he could do is secure that agreement.
Well, let's go and talk to some of the people now who are protesting. So, what do you think today will achieve?
I'm hoping today will achieve, the building of our mass movement, especially for Palestine, but also around issues for legalization for all, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, and reproductive freedom.
So, how do you reconcile LGBTQ rights with what happens with Hamas in their rule in Gaza?
I don't see how those two issues are connected, but what I do know is
there are no LGBTQ rights in Palestine, in Gaza.
That's not true. I'm going to be quite frank and just say that's pinkwashing, and that's Israeli propaganda right there. There are LGBTQ people in Gaza, but guess what? The issue here is Palestine. It's the fact that the people in Gaza are going through a genocide. We're not here to talk about LGBTQ rights. We're here to stand with Palestine.
She raised LGBTQ rights. I didn't raise it.
Yeah, we demand those here in the U.S., but we are placing those demands on the Democrats to act on those demands here and make sure that LGBTQ rights are presented.
When you say Killer Kamala and Genocide Joe, don't you increase the likelihood that Donald Trump wins the next election?
No, the Democrats increase the likelihood that Donald Trump will win because they refuse to end U.S. aid to Israel and they are complicit in a genocide.
Just wanted to get a sense, how many people do you think are here today?
Here in the whole crowd?
Yeah.
I would say 10,000.
10,000?
Lots and lots, yeah. The park was very full.
And so there was a suggestion, right, that maybe when Biden stood down and Harris took over, that some of this stuff would go away or at least be less. Why hasn't that happened?
I'm not here to comment on the outcome of the election, but what I will say is that Kamala Harris's positions on Israel are not very different from Joe Biden's, and so far it's a lot of empty rhetoric. There is one government responsible for enabling the genocide in Palestine, in addition to the Israeli government that's carrying it out, and that is the United States government. In the last 10 months, about 40,000 civilians have died in Palestine. The U.S. government has sent billions upon billions of not just dollars, but weapons to Israel, and Kamala Harris has been complicit in that just as much as Joe Biden has.
So you think she is responsible for a genocide, or at least partly so?
I think the U.S. government is actively enabling the genocide, and that, the political establishment and everybody who is in power there is complicit in it happening.
Would you not be therefore willing to vote for her in November?
I'm not here to comment on how I would vote, how people should vote for the outcome of the election. What I am here to say is that there is one solution to enact a ceasefire now. That is an arms embargo that politicians, including Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and the rest of the Democratic Party can and should and need to support immediately.
I mean, if Trump gets it, he'll be even more hostile, won't he?
Once again, I'm not here to comment on the outcome of the election. There are people with the power to end this right now, and they need to do so.
Just wanted to get a sense from you about why you think you and so many other people are here today.
Because there's a genocide going on and we can't stand by and be silent.
People are chanting that Kamala Harris is responsible for a genocide, or partly so, and and Joe Biden as well. Do you think they are responsible for it?
Absolutely. We're the ones who are supplying the bombs. It's with our taxpayer dollars. They're the ones making the decisions to send. Well, we actually don't know who's making the decisions, but at any rate, they're the people in power. They're the ones who are funding the genocide.
So will you vote for Harris in November?
I don't talk about who I vote for, but
No,
I won't.
you won't. I won't.
I won't vote for anybody who supports genocide.
I'm sure you wouldn't want Trump, even less than you would want Harris.
It's getting to be Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
Really?
Yeah.
They're so different. They're so different. They believe in such different things, surely.
The problem is they're all part of a bipartisan group that wants to have a unipolar world with the United States on top, with imperialistic, endless wars. That's what we're fighting.
I mean, what do you say that this protest against the Democrats is going to mean that you're more likely going to end up with Donald Trump?
Well, I really don't care about who's the president. I just care about whoever is the president, is that they will stand up for what's right, and that skin color, if you're a man, woman, where you're from, that does not matter, but as long as you do what's right for the people, but not just for the Americans, but for the other countries, because I have family in Iraq. Many people have family in Palestine. Their families are dying. So if you only support your own country, why are you the president? You should be able to support, be kind and respect other countries, other people, other ethnics, other religions, not just Americans.
Sure, but if you don't care who's president, they're very different. If you're going to have
I do care only about what they do for the people.
Sure, but the difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is profound, isn't it?
They're both bad.
As bad as each other?
Yes.
You really think? You really think?
Decided who she supports.
Well, she has said there are too many deaths of innocent civilians in Gaza.
Yes, but then she also supports Israel. She has not made a clear statement where she stands.
And you genuinely think there is no difference between Kamala Harris?
There is a difference, but
who's better?
I'm not answering that question.
Why not?
Why not?
Why can't answer my question?
Because
who's better?
All that matters is what they do for the people.
So we've reached basically the shadow of the convention centre, which is as far as any of these people are going to get. The perimeter is very strong. More and more people are arriving, and they will through the course of the week. One thing about the people here that I of course I respect the passion that they have enormously, and what has happened and is continuing to happen in Gaza is so unacceptable. It's so appalling. We've talked about it many times on the show, the humanitarian crisis, so I completely understand. I suppose the thing I can't quite understand, and maybe it's just a kind of political element in a sense, is when you say to people, because I suspect a lot of these people will not vote for Harris because they feel so passionately about this, is when they say that would make no difference. And that seems to me to be a fallacious argument on two respects. First of all, clearly a Trump or Harris administration would make a big difference domestically in the United States. They're very far apart on all sorts of things. But even in terms of foreign policy, I mean, there is no doubt, partly for the electoral reasons, if nothing else, that we were discussing before we spoke to people, a Harris, Biden administration, whoever, they desperately want to try and get a ceasefire. I hear what they're saying in terms of arms and so on, because the arms exports is a really live and important question. But there is no doubt that there is not serious diplomatic effort going into trying to obtain a ceasefire. Whether it will be successful or not is a different question. That almost certainly would not happen in the same way with the Trump administration, because they would ally themselves far more explicitly, even more explicitly, with Netanyahu and the Israeli government.
So I went with Donald Trump on his trip to Israel and Saudi Arabia, and it was just unconditional, the support that he was giving. And the moving of the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was seen as a hugely symbolic act, which was unbelievably pro-Israel to do that. So when these people say, and I totally get the emotion and the sincerity of what they're saying, when they say there is no difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, there is a difference. There is a very profound difference, and it's not just in terms of what foreign policy would be like, it would be on all sorts of other policies. But look, this is their protest. It's all pretty good humoured, it's pretty relaxed. The police look fairly relaxed. There's no kind of, you and I have both covered protests which have turned ugly. This doesn't feel like that. And they know they're not going to get to the convention centre. it's hard to imagine that they're going to storm police lines.
I think the question basically in terms of these protests and the people on it is going to be exactly how representative they are and how big they are. There is a school of thought, and who knows whether it will be true or not, there is a school of thought among some Democratic strategists that these protests help Harris in one respect, which is that they make it clear that she is not part of the radical left. One of the critiques about her from Trump and the Republicans is that she is part of the radical left, that in a sense she is one with the sort of people who are here. The fact that they are here to very clearly and audibly protest against her specifically, you can argue sends a message to the wider American public, but of course the utility of that has to be balanced against what we were saying at the beginning, that this is an election which is going to be defined by the tightest of margins, and if there are enough people like those that we've been speaking to here who clearly probably would have voted Democrat but won't over this election, that could be enough. And that is why I say this issue ultimately is toxic for the Democrats, toxic for Harris, leaving aside the humanitarian requirements of it in and of itself, and it has to be shut down.
Shut up, woman! Listen. Walk to the side. Just a second. Come on, man. You hurt my fucking friends. Don't fucking piece of shit.
Just stay right there.
Listen, what about all my fucking homies? Let her fucking go.
I have a daughter.
I got a fucking daughter too. Why don't you fight for them? Why don't you fucking
I
fight
don't
for
want you to
them?
cross here. You're looking good. Hey, put it back up.
Fuck you and your fucking fences. You're all fucking fascist piece of shit.
There's been a standoff now for about 40 minutes with a group of protesters who've breached one of the lines. Riot police have now moved in with their blue helmets on, very kind of redolent of 1968, and they've got the protesters are using banners as sort of javelins to try and throw at the police, and also dismantle the fencing that has been erected to keep the line from police and the protesters. The riot police are here. To be honest, it's not that many who are spoiling for a fight, and I think that if more were, then you'd see an awful lot more police come in. Quite tense, but I mean, you know, the police have got this under control.
But I have to say, I mean, like, some of the chanting that we're hearing, I think in some ways is quite extraordinary, right? And shows just the radicalized element of some of this. You've got some of these people screaming, right? CPD, KKK. You've got some of these people screaming CPD, Chicago Police Department, KKK, they're all the same. I mean, some of these people are black officers. I would imagine they probably find that pretty grotesque.
Oxford or Cambridge, I can't tell from the accent, but I know it's one of the two.
Pardon, sorry?
Oxford or Cambridge, I just wondered.
Yeah, Oxford actually, yeah. Since you ask.
He didn't sense I was Southampton.
No. But saying CPD, KKK, they're all the same. Or calling some of the officers, again, black officers, Nazis. I mean, by the way, a lot of these people saying this are white. And I have to say that if I were them, I would find that pretty grotesque, actually.
Look, this is like any protest I've ever reported on, where you have got a cause that is, you know, a perfectly legitimate, understandable concern, and you've got a fringe element that attach themselves to this and want to fight. And they want to have a confrontation with the police. And so far, I would say the police have got this completely, and a few people have been arrested. We've seen a few people dragged away. I filmed one guy who had a huge cuddly toy strapped to his back, which made it very difficult for the police to get the handcuffs on him, which took some time. But you know what? It's kind of quiet again now, and I suspect this skirmishing will go on for most of the evening, and, you know, who knows? Probably not erupt into anything much more.
Yeah, but I think what it is a reminder. It's just a reminder. This is going to be going on all week. All week, this is due to be going on for, with different groups being bussed in and coming along. So I think it's just a reminder. The DNC will be aware of this. You know, as we were saying, it can just take one spark or one item thrown or one projectile, whatever it is, to get things really going. And that, you know, that's going to worry the DNC because they don't want. Although, as we were saying, there's an element where they might want to cast themselves against some of these people. They don't want this convention to look like chaos. They don't want it to look like disorder. They don't want all of those memories we've been talking about it, 1968, kind of hanging thick in the air, people talking about it, not least because, of course, that was a bad year for Democrats. They don't want any sense in which they've lost control of the streets and attract this stuff. So it will make them nervous, I think rightly so.
Right, well, we've got another day of convention ahead of us. Of course, it is Joe Biden's former boss, Barack Obama, and First Lady Michelle Obama, among many, many others, due to speak tonight. As I say, John, by the way, I mean, as we're saying, this is my first convention, and we've been comparing it to party conferences. I mean, you know, we're both feeling a little bit bleary-eyed this morning, given up.
Speak for yourself. I've been for a 10-mile run.
Well, yes, of course. Well, you are me. You are Mr. Motivator. Another nice 90s reference there after Cilla Black the other day. But anyway, I mean, you know, I do think we should have a little word with our American cousins about this stuff. I mean, I do.
People want to go out to eat in the evening. They want to go and get lashed.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I mean, party conference, right? I mean, it's a smaller affair, right? It doesn't have the Colosseum feel of politics that last night did. But my word, at least we got the timing right? Political speeches in the day, getting pissed at night. Instead, we've got nothing to do in the day and a lot of speeches at night.
At least we're not hungover this morning, although we did manage to get a late night drink. Except for Rory, our cameraman, had an incident at the door.
I think that's best left, isn't it?
Best left unsaid.
Let's leave it to your imagination.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.